Alright, so here we go. Like I talked about, I'm going to do it this way to help make it a little bit easier and faster for class. So, looking at the major psychological perspectives, and this is just going to be a nice way for us to have, again, a little bit more of a grounding of what are the different lenses that psychology is viewed as. So, the first is evolutionary psychology, and this is where you can even really tie back to William James and functionalism. Right, it attempts to explain useful mental and psychological traits such as memory, perception, language as adaptations. Essentially, the functional products of natural selection. So it goes back to Darwin, but like we talked about in class, right, what you think and what you do is going to be a product of the society around you. So it's basically just built as a way that we've all changed and adapted mentally as we've obviously grown as a species, and the way that we do things and the reason we do things is to get along with everything around us. But it was something actually really interesting too. So down here I have this connection. So fear of spiders and snakes is actually evolutionary. So it's an interesting article, but it basically gets into the fact of when we are originally born, people have a natural fear of spiders and snakes. And through studies and research, basically what the finding is, when you're a baby, you obviously don't really have a natural defense system other than crying. Well, think about, hundreds, thousands of years ago with early humans. If you're in a camp together, especially at night or whatever throughout the day, if a bear or a tiger or something big is walking to the camp, everyone's going to see this or hear it, right? But spiders, snakes, things like that, they're silent. So we've actually, as humans, developed a natural fear of those things, especially as babies, because babies are going to cry, and when babies cry, adults go and look to see why is the baby crying. And it almost becomes a natural defense system is saying oh, look there's a scary snake or there's a scary spider. So it's actually a natural thing. Next is biological psychology. This is just going to focus on the function of the brain, the rest of the nervous system. So, the different body parts and how those interact, the different parts of the brain, how do they interact with each other. So thinking, learning, feeling, sensing, perceiving, those are all going to be parts of the biological perspective. One of the big things about the biological perspective is the fact that it's going to constantly be evolving, which really makes a lot of sense. As we continue to learn more about brain systems and brain functions and body systems and body functions, we're going to have to change and adapt to that new learning. So this field especially, and they all are evolving with modern times, but this field especially, with more research into the brain, the better we understand what's going on inside of us. And lastly, so that last bullet point there, right, there's a strong aspect of the field is how the body impacts the brain. So how physiology impacts our psychology. And that's something that's being studied more and more as well, is how does our physical body actually impact our thoughts and our conscious behaviors? And there actually is becoming, it's really interesting, a lot of new work on, if you've ever heard go with your gut, or your gut feeling tells you something. There is starting to get more and more research that there is a legitimate connection between your stomach and your brain. And the, literally the bacteria within your stomach has a connection to the brain. It's still kind of new, and there's, not overwhelming evidence or anything about it, but it's a new topic within the field of psychology that's pretty cool and pretty interesting, that there is starting to be some science that says legitimately go with your gut because it has a direct connection to your brain. Cognitive psychology. So this is the scientific study of the mind as an information processor. So this became very popular in the 1950s. As a reaction to the behaviorist view. So what is going to be really interesting about fields of psychology especially is they almost are all reactions to a previous field or a previous lens. So like we talked about in class, how like functionalism was a competitor to structuralism, but was also a reaction to it. Gestalt was a reaction to structuralism. Behaviorism was a reaction to structuralism and functionalism. Right. Basically, a new theory comes up, and then another psychologist goes, no, I disagree with that. Here's a better way to look at it. And that's how cognitive psychology comes about, but that's really how every new field seems to start, is like the person has a problem with whatever is the popular viewpoint of that time period, and they make a new way to look at it. So cognitive psych, reaction to behaviorists, but the primary focus of this field is studying intelligence, learning, but it's very big on the scientific method. So how do we learn? How do we prove that we learn? How do we actually study intelligence and understand intelligence? And how do we measure it? Those are all things that are going to be very much focused upon within cognitive psychology. And you'll see it, relatively often, that ends up like cognitive psychologists will end up comparing people to computers in regards to like the brain being an information processor. And what is it good at? What is it not good at? How can the brain do multiple things at once that even some computers can struggle with, and things like that. Next up, socio-cultural psychology, or easier way to say it, social psych. So social psych is the scientific study of how people's thoughts, feelings, beliefs, intentions, goals, everything is constructed within a social context, but then also how we are impacted, all of those things, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, whatever, how all of those things are impacted by the people around us. So social psych became very, very big in the 50s and then 60s, 70s, 80s, and it was a major part of the popularity rise of social psych was a reaction to World War II, and a reaction to, frankly, how did Germany, specifically Germany, how did that country fall into Nazism? And like why was the populace just so willing to go along with, Hitler and the rest of the Nazi party, like, propaganda? So much of social psych was grounded on, like, why do people do what they do, especially in group settings? So that's going to be the big part of social psych. And then you see, like, the little, cartoon here. Say it ain't so, you gotta be kidding. Perish the thought, heaven forbid, no. But everyone says, like, all those in favor say aye. So, right, the boss is saying, like, hey, this is this great idea. Everyone's like, this is a terrible idea. But you kind of go along, and once one person says yes, then you're more apt to follow them and also say yes. It's just that social pressure put on individuals. Humanist psychology. This one is pretty modern, especially kicked off 80s into the 90s, still very popular today. It's trying to like study the whole person there, the uniqueness of each individual, but just to jump down, even though it's not exactly the same as positive psychology, it's very similar. And by that is it's trying to focus on like what makes people good, what makes people unique. And this, frankly, humanist, was a big reaction to social psych, because social psych was like, people are awful, people are terrible, look what all the evil things that humans can do to each other. Humanist psychology, and then by proxy, positive psychology, was like, hey, people can be inherently good, and let's focus on those things that are good. Let's focus on things that can improve our lives. So it felt, that we can be more personal with psychology, but then also be more positive within psychology in general. Much of this field is created to be personalized to the subject, rather than creating larger applicable statements or treatments. So, in a lot of fields, it's, hey, we're trying to do the scientific method in order to say, like, this is true for large swaths of people or certain types of people, whatever it may be. Humanist psychology is supposed to be very individualized. So it's helping you where you are at rather than just being someone that's like a blanket statement. And then you see here, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and what people need in order to kind of progress in their lives and progress in their mental health in a way. Behavioral psychology we talked about in class. One, all behaviors are learned through interaction, so that's conditioning, either good or bad, punishment or rewards. And again, it only is concerned about observable behavior. So they do acknowledge like there is thought going on behind the scenes. Like obviously there's thought going on behind the scenes behind every action. But behaviorists just simply don't care about it because, like we talked about, you can't fully read someone's mind. You can't see within their brain to like what is their true intention. Right? Someone could have the best of intentions but still do something really bad, even if it's not on purpose. Behaviorists would say, you know what? I appreciate that you want to do something good, but whatever the behavior was really bad. So that's the focus. They only care about the behaviors, not the reasons why. Biopsychosocial is just a big amalgamation of biological, psychosocial, social psych. It's a big grouping of all three. So you can see here, biopsychosocial model of health. A lot of this is like this is more for like treatments, frankly, especially. And how do we take the best of certain fields of study and bring them all together to help, certain treatments, whether it's mental health issues or addiction or like, pain or whatever it may be. It's just trying to use the best of a few different models to bring together. The psychodynamic perspective, this is going to be starting with Freud, and this is how he explains behavior. So you have your conscious, your pre-conscious. These are like things that you're not actually thinking about, but you can access, so like your memories. And then your unconscious is things you can't really access. And then he also has the ego, id, and superego, which we will get into far more detail, but basically this is how he views, or the psychodynamic perspective views people, that there's three parts of like your being, and then also of your conscious level. And that's it. So those are the major fields of study, the major perspectives: psychodynamic, biopsychosocial, behavioral, humanist, social psych, cognitive psych, biological psych, evolutionary psych. Those are the major ones that we'll talk about and we'll review throughout the year. They're not the only ones, but those are the big ones that we're going to talk about. So, thanks for listening, and I will see you tomorrow.